You're right. That's why we need you, Christy. So our main goal is to kind of help with leadership development. It's good, we learned over the years that it's good to bring in things like what Gary just shared, and some of the spiritual formation stuff that Steve shared this morning, which was invaluable. And you guys, you've heard a lot of good stuff today, so I'm going to screw it all up now and mess up the whole day with what I want to talk to you about. I want to, has everybody got a handout that I had? You want a copy? Okay, great. I think we're good, Jimmy. Thank you, buddy. So, you had an extra, didn't you? There. That's okay. That's okay. So, what I want to talk to you today about is a way that I think pastors, a lot of times, what we do is we tend to take all that stuff like we had that Steve kind of shared with us this morning, which was so good. A lot of the stuff that Kelton shared with us, which was also good. And sometimes we have ways of just kind of getting in our own way. Sometimes we are our own worst enemies with the way that we choose to lead. And one of the things that Kelton mentioned, that very first point that he made around looking in the mirror versus looking, out the window, that mirror thing where we're looking at ourselves. Sometimes we fail to do that. And I think a lot of times remember things that we try to do as leaders, right? Or as pastors, that just because we're pastors, we assume we have to be leaders and we have to lead a certain way. Your makeup, right, is the most effective way for you to lead, right? Getting in touch with that. It just frustrates me all the time. And in the book I wrote, I put almost half a chapter there just ranting on this, about how you hear churches all the time talking about pastors have to give a vision. I'm so sick of it, because really, if you look at the Myers-Briggs, which Kelton looked at, and other indicators, probably only about 10 to 15% of the general population are visionary thinkers. Okay, and so what happens is when we try to take pastors and pigeonhole them into roles that they are not gifted at, we are really shortchanging their abilities, and we're hurting the church, and that's not good. So my big thing when I'm talking to pastors and leaders in the corporate world is it's hugely about self-awareness. Get in touch with who you are. I don't care how many assessments you got. I did a team on last Wednesday at a startup in RTP, and one of the things that I always do in my work with teams is I ask them at the beginning, what are your expectations? What are your apprehensions? I want to know what they are, right? Because I want to know where you're coming from, right? It's kind of funny, almost like I'd love to do that on Sunday morning with our congregation. What are your expectations today? What are your apprehensions? I may do it sometimes, just kind of throw them off, right? Just kind of throw them out there, right? And so one of them was, I don't want to be bucketed. In other words, I don't want to be labeled, right? And so by the end of the day, the lady who did not want to be labeled liked the label that she got during the time we had during the day. And so the point is that we have to have the self-awareness to know where we're coming from, what we're doing, what we're about. And so don't get caught up in this whole general, it's almost like this bubble that we pastors live in to fit into this particular mold. Understand who you are, right? Understand how God gifted you, whether you use shape or whatever you do, whatever you use. StrengthsFinder helps with that, and a number of other things. There's a tool called the McQuaig tool. That is MCQUAIG, which I would recommend that you pastors look at. It's out of Canada. It's a fantastic tool. It's very comprehensive. And if you want to get a good feel for each other, I would suggest that you take that. And if you would like to, I will be happy to send you the one that I did. You can see it on me, just so you can see it kind of as an example and what it can do for you. And this is funny. It's McQuaig, MCQUAIG. Okay, you might want to look that up at the McQuaig Institute. Now, it's not a Christian organization. I find a lot of times the best resources for churches are those that were designed outside the church. That's my opinion in a lot of ways, in a lot of situations. What's that? Yeah, right. And so there is. Yeah, you got the people who say, well, we're a church, not a business. Well, it is a business. Exactly. And so here's the thing you got to remember. The same organizations that make businesses successful are the same principles that make them successful. Pretty much are the same principles that make churches successful as well. There's a spiritual element, obviously, which we don't have necessarily in a lot of for-profit organizations, but those principles are pretty much the same. So I want to talk to you about some of those principles today, because I really believe that out of all the good stuff we heard here, out of all the good stuff we got from Kelton today, And all the good things that we learn from those other gurus that we read, and we want to do these things well, and particularly when we're thinking about discipleship, we oftentimes tend to, as I said, get in our own way. And I want to kind of use a story that Jesus gave us about moving toward the time when he was getting ready to leave, right, through the crucifixion and the resurrection. It's a story of the feeding of the 5,000 plus. Now, this is, I guess, this is the one miracle that's recorded in all four Gospels, I believe, right? And some of you all who are better at that than I am can probably tell me if that's wrong, but I believe that is the one miracle that's recorded in all four. And so we got to go to all these four different books and read the story to kind of grasp the real points that are salient, that are really prominent when it comes to leadership. And so I believe that what Jesus did was he was trying to help the disciples understand really practical discipleship. What Steve gave us something here is very practical. Now, before it gets practical, though, there's a theoretical piece, right, Steve? What he put on here, right? And you know, our job is to kind of make that practical. So one of the things we have to do, whatever your discipleship model is, and a plug for Steve, by the way, one of our last sessions, he talked about how they do simply every Sunday night step 1, 2, 3, 4 religiously, right? You don't deviate from that at all. We did the same thing. We kicked it off in October on your inspiration and what you guys are doing. The part where we don't deviate from it all, I'm really having a little problem with that because sometimes I got to be here when I don't want to be here. You know.
I videoed last night.
You videoed last night, yeah. That's what we're going to have to do, yeah. So just to kind of say, whatever your model is, right? You have still got to put your people at work in serving and doing missions, etc., all that kind of stuff, right? You want to provide a forum for them not only to learn the educational side, right? But you want them to put it to work. And so I find that a lot of pastors really don't know how to work themselves out of a job. Okay? And I would say that has got to be a big part of what we want to do, what we have to do, right? Because when we successfully work ourselves out of a job, many of us would say, well, what if I really don't have a job? What if I'm not needed, right? If you have a lot of insecurities around that can be hard for you, right? But really successful leaders in all walks of life, whether it be pastors, whether it be leaders in secular organizations, etc., understand the value of working themselves out of the job, right? The idea, though, is not that you drop the stuff and let it go, but that the whole idea of developing others to kind of do your work is important. Now, I will tell you this, in every organization I work with, those people who are successful at working themselves out of their job, they never lose their jobs. You know why? Because they prove themselves to be the most valuable people in the whole company, right? Because they're multiplying themselves, replicating themselves, etc. And I believe we've used a lot of these terminologies in the church for many years. We're going to talk a little bit about this 4-letter word called accountability, which I despise. Absolutely despise the word, because nobody can define it. I've yet to see a church leader that has done a good job of defining it for me, nor have I found a business leader that I feel has done justice in defining that word. I think that is another way that we tend to get in our own way in terms of discipleship, because accountability is important. And how do we apply it? How do we live it if we don't really know what it is? So I'm not saying that everybody has a bad definition. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that the lack of consistency and understanding in that area is a problem when we're trying to help people understand how to develop and become all they can be. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. I believe that when Jesus fed the 5,000 plus, his big thing, he was preaching a sermon that day, an active sermon, right? Because this was rife with actions to the disciples. He knew that he was going to be heading out. He had plans for the church. These disciples, this plucky band of, whatever you want to call them, they were a funky bunch of guys. They really were. He had a mission for them that was pretty doggone compelling, right? You're going to start the church. You're going to run the church. And by the way, you're going to nurture it during its startup phase so that it becomes the most powerful force in the world, right? They weren't ready to hear that when they were on the hillside that day, right? And so there, as we know, Jesus was out teaching. The crowds were coming, which was phenomenal. And we see in what happens in Jesus' interaction with these, with the disciples and with the 5,000 plus. Now the 5,000 was obviously what? That was just the men, right? That didn't count the women and the children that might have been there. So who knows how many might have been there? 15,000? Who knows? And so we see a few points in the story that I want to bring out to you. I'll bring about 5 or 6 things that are principles of working yourself out of a job. Now, I'm not telling you to find lay people to take over the pastoral role. What I'm encouraging you to do is figure out what can be given away, right, so that you can focus on even perhaps more lofty and important pursuits, okay? For the leader who's working themselves out of a job, there's always something bigger and better for them to pursue. A lot of times your ability to dream, right, is your limitation, right? Your ability to do what Kelton said, bring others around you who can be mentors or folks, who can be peer input to you, right? That if you put limits on that for you, those limits will definitely keep you down, right? No question about it. And so the 6 things that I believe Jesus gave us, and some of these are kind of buzzwords, please forgive me for that, but understand the principle. That's what I want you to get, all right? The first thing that we see when Jesus kind of gets into this mode with the disciples is he gives them empowerment. He gives them empowerment, right? That's the first thing he does, and that's definitely a buzzword, right? But I want you to understand what it really means. It means simply that it's giving the okay for somebody else to do it. That's really what it is. And it's when the leader assigns 2 things, right? First of all, responsibility and authority, okay? A lot of times what we do in the church, our church world, is we will assign folks responsibility, but we don't give them the authority. You see the difference? You know what I'm talking about? We'll ask them to do something and maybe bring it to us. Maybe there's, I struggle with this. You know why? Because I'm a bit of a control freak, okay? So when I ask my staff to do things, they bring it to me. Invariably, there is a liability there in which I will probably take it and try to put my spin on it, right? Giving someone the authority along with the responsibility is saying, you know what, if you do this, and if I expect you to do it well, if you do it well, we're going to take what you've done and we're going to roll with it. I'm not going to make any changes to it, right? Now, there has to be some guidelines in terms of acceptability, and we're going to talk about that in the second phase of what we're going to talk about today. But assuming that those guidelines are there and it's known, a lot of times what we do as pastors a lot of times is we give the responsibility, but because we got a control thing going on, we will probably not delegate the authority, all right? Jesus really did both when he was dealing with the disciples this day. One of the disciples came to him and said, hey, Jesus, we got all these people, it's lunchtime, what are we going to do? We need to head over into town, go to the Taco Bell, and just get a big spread, bring it back, and feed everybody. What did Jesus say? He said, that isn't necessary, you feed them. Remember that point in the story where he said that? That isn't necessary, you don't have to go get anything for them. No takeouts, no need. You feed them, right? In that moment, he was empowering his disciples to do something that they had never done before. And we kind of know what the result was, right? It would change their lives. The second thing that we see Jesus doing in this work yourself out of a job kind of thing, because this is really kind of what he was doing, preparing them to carry on after he was gone, is taking advantage of teachable moments. Teachable moments. Sometimes we are going so fast and so hard, and our pacing is so great that we don't take advantage as leaders of teachable moments. And I call these just simply opportunities for illustration and explanation that arise from normal circumstances. A lot of times teachable moments are not the things that come out of, something that's so, gargantuan or anything like that. Teachable moments just come out of generally, normal times that we might encounter every day. And so we see in John 6:5, when Jesus soon, he said he saw a great crowd of people climbing the hill looking for him. Turning to Philip, he asked him, he said, Philip, where can we buy bread to feed all these people? Okay? Teachable moment, right? Now that account's a little different from what we see. There's a little bit different quotes, etc., in the Matthew account, in the John account, but there were probably multiple conversations going on. And so the authors, there's probably none of the authors had a complete picture of the whole day. I mean, that was in itself a gargantuan experience, right? And so there was a moment in time while this was going on where Jesus just said, Philip, where can we buy bread to feed all these people? And that leads us to the third piece of driving this thing, this work yourself out of a job. If you're going to be a leader who's going to help others assume part of what you're doing, you got to learn how to coach. You got to learn how to coach. And some of us, I know that Bob, I know that some of the other Mike, maybe we've been through coach training, etc. With Kelton has with some of our earlier work together as pastors and through our denomination. And some of us still do the coaching thing. Here's the key to coaching, though. The key to coaching is raising, yet not answering, the questions that the people you're talking to must consider themselves. Okay? It's raising and not answering the questions that they must consider themselves. Because here's the point. A lot of times because we feel like we're supposed to be such leaders, we feel that means that we have to tell people what they need to do. Because we think being a leader, we've got to demonstrate how smart we are. And we do that by telling them what to do, when in reality, the best thing you can do is raise the questions, right? A number of change leadership methodologies are at use in the corporate world today. One of them is called Lean, L-E-A-N. You might have heard of that methodology. Another one's called Six Sigma. Lean is kind of the big thing right now in terms of change process methodology. And one of the rules or tools that they use is to have a standard of 5 whys. Now, what do we mean by whys? The 5 whys. Now, anybody want to guess? What do you think that means? Barry.
Yes, why 5 times. It just kind of builds and it just down to the root.
Every time you answer a why question, right, ask another why question. Exactly. Because each time you're getting closer to what? The real problem, right? You're never going to get to the real problems until you ask the why question multiple times, right? And that's really where most organizations don't hit it. It's not that they don't have good techniques, right? It's that they don't define the problems very well. One of the reasons I really love what Steve Davis does, and I like the fact that Steve says, okay, I got this, I don't know what to do with it now, right? But, you kind of said that, right? But it's a little bit in jest. But the point is, what did Steve really do here for us? What did he really do? He answered why questions, and he did this in his mind, and Steve got us to perhaps one of the most basic problems of human nature as it relates to our spiritual makeup, right? Now, he's not solving it for us yet, right? That's part 2. We'll have that next month, right? But it is so important that you get to the right problem. Because until you get to the right problem, you'll never have the right solution. You're right, your solution may sound great, but if you don't get to the right problem, you will never solve your issue. I see companies all the time, churches all the time, they'll take a shot at doing something, they'll have a big planning campaign or whatever the case might be, and it turns out what they're starting from is not even a problem issue. Does that make sense? And so it has minimal impact, and a lot of the things that continue to happen came because, we did those work, we did this stuff, and nothing ever changed. Well, there's a reason nothing ever changed. You didn't hit the problem, right? We think we do sometimes, but we really don't. Again, I love what these guys did because everything they said is so relevant. A lot of times we don't get the problem because, as Kelton told us this morning, we're afraid to look at the mirror and we're always looking at out the window, right? There's an element of personal responsibility all of us have to bear with this. It's a heavy burden. If you're like me, sometimes you truly sink under that burden, right? You do, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. So the whole idea of coaching is getting back, and there's a lot of why. So real leaders, what they do is they ask more questions than they make statements. Does that make sense? So practice asking questions when you're doing your development, you're trying to drive discipleship, servants, missionaries, etc., or whatever in your church. Okay, we might do something on coaching a little bit further on, maybe in another session early in the year that might kind of help this. There's some exercises we can do that will really help us along this. So Jesus, it says that when in the next verse there, the verse 6 in John 6, when Jesus had said, Philip, where do we buy food to feed all these people? He was testing Philip, for he already knew what he was going to do. Even if you already know what you're going to do as a leader, it's probably not best for you to always tell that to people, right? See if you can lead them to self-discovery. Because self-discovery will create more habitual behavior, okay? When you lead them to discover it, right, that's going to cause them to do it next time, right? This is a huge part of accountability that we miss out. And we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. The fourth thing is motivation, which is encouraging others to look for solutions to the issues at hand. And so in the Mark account in chapter 6, verse 38, how much food do you have? Go and find out. They came back and they reported, we have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Okay? So what did Jesus do? He sent them away to try to find a solution. Okay? Now, if they had not taken this step, do you think that the miracle of the 5,000 would have had as big an impact as it wound up having? Probably not. Because guess what? Jesus sent them away to find what they could find, and they only came up with just enough to maybe feed one of our tables here. Maybe half the table. Right? And so that was huge. He encouraged them to look for solutions to the issues at hand. If you're going to lead, you've got to motivate. You got to motivate. Sometimes I miss this because I'm so direct and to the point sometimes. Things I say tend to hurt people's feelings more than they motivate them. Anybody else? Anybody else there with me? Right there, Ray Wickham is. Yeah, they're pointing at Ray. My people are pointing at me too. So yeah, that's the way it is. My people are pointing at you, I'm sure, right? And so yeah, some of us are that way. Motivation is not something that necessarily just comes natural, right? We have to think about what we talk about, what we say. 3 things that you got to remember about all of your communication. And I'm not talking about your Sunday morning preaching communication, okay? You got to think of your tone, your topic, and your timing if you want to have communication that's going to be credible, okay? You got to get all 3 of those things in line, okay? There are times when I screw up on all those, right? Sometimes we take this timing thing and our idea is, it's just not today. And tomorrow it's just not today. It's just not today. That means you're an avoider. That means you're a conflict avoider, right? And you can't lead and be a conflict avoider. Okay? So tone, topic, timing, make sure all those things kind of line up the best you can. All right, as you think about how to motivate people. Here's so far, empowerment. We got to have empowerment. We got to think about teachable moments. Jesus used those. Coaching, asking the questions instead of being directive. Now, sometimes you got to be directive if you've got people who don't have a lot of skills and they don't have a lot of natural commitment. With those people, that's all you can do is direct them. There is no hope for coaching them. Okay? No hope whatsoever. Matter of fact, if you got a person like that, you need to find a way to get them out of the ministry or off your staff. Okay? They need to be reallocated to the community, right? And a lot of times, the people that oftentimes need to be reallocated to the community are people who might have high competency level, but their commitment and their intangibles and their attitudes just generally suck. You probably cannot withstand that person on your staff very long. Okay? And some of us, I know that we kind of cry on each other's shoulders. We have had situations like this, right? Where we have had to deal with those situations, right? It's painful, but again, you've got to remember the organization is not larger than any single individual, ourselves included. Okay? Ourselves included. And leaders are always called, real leaders are called to take people to places where they themselves have never been. So your call in your church is to take your church to a place where you yourself have never been. Think of Moses. He led those goober heads all through the wilderness, right? All those years. He knew during the final years of his journey that he himself wasn't even going to make it into the promised land. He didn't get to go himself. But did that deter him? One of the reasons I want Kelton to get to the next part of his research is because I think there's some Moses lessons in there for some of us. Does that make sense? Am I right, Kelton? Could be. We'll interpret it. We'll see how that comes out. So I think there's some good stuff there. So remember that about motivating others. Here's the next thing that Jesus did. I think he did this well. He clarified. Clarification is about keeping it simple. If you're a leader, you've got to be involved enough to help your people know what to do and understand sometimes maybe even how to do it, if depending on the situation. But you can't tell them, you can't be micromanaging them. Does that make sense? And that's a hard place to walk sometimes, right? I cross that boundary sometimes, right? And keeping it simple has to do with speed up the completion of a project through logical simplification. How can you continually simplify the things that you're needing people to do in your church? And how can you continue to simplify the things that they need to do in their lives in order to grow? Okay? That's a really important piece. We had a membership class last night, and I was talking to a lady who's she's almost ready to finish her doctorate in education. And she's relatively new to our church and has children leadership experience. So I'm thinking, whoa, we could really use her in children's, right? And she said, I used to do that, but I had to do it all myself, and it was all I burned out, and I couldn't do everything they wanted me to do. And so I told her about how in our structure we kind of have Christy, who one of the many things she does is she serves our children's ministry folks by creating all the lessons for them, making sure everything they need is there, so all they got to do is kind of plug in and go do it, right? That's what we're talking about. That's the simplification that we need to give people to make it easier for them to come in and do real impact kind of stuff. So the basic rule here is that you always need to break projects down into more manageable component pieces, okay? This is what it means to think strategically. A lot of people think that strategic thinking is about big picture thinking. It's not. It is not. Strategic thinking is taking the big picture. Doesn't mean you got to come up with it, okay? But it's taking it and it's breaking it down into tangible, manageable, doable components so that execution can come. All right, does that make sense? So whenever you have, one of the things that caused me to write the book that some of you read, thank you, some of you're still using these door stops and things to hold your windows open, so I appreciate that too, is the fact that in a lot of organizations, particularly churches, we just don't have corporate language around planning. So we'll do a long-range strategic planning process, which is an oxymoron in itself. Long-range strategic planning is an oxymoron. So if you got somebody trying to sell you one of those processes, don't buy. Don't buy, because it tells me right off that they have no idea that you got to have the long range first before you can get the strategy. And you got to get the mission, which comes in between, before you can get to the strategy, right? Before you can even get to the execution stuff in terms of the tactics, all right? So, but breaking down large projects, this is what Jesus did. I love what Jesus did here. This was fabulous. This is so subtle. When you preached on this before, you may not have caught this, okay? And he says, there were about 5,000 men there. And Jesus said, just tell them to sit down on the ground in groups of about, what? What's that? 50. 50. You're looking at 5,000, maybe 15,000 people. And they're saying, well, we can't do this. Well, Jesus said put them in groups of 50, right? Pretty simple, right? Now, I didn't say they made the progress simple. They were still overwhelmed, right? But it's easier to feed a group of 50. Here's the other thing you need to make sure you do is you're trying to help people take the practical side of discipleship and take this into activity, etc. Find ways not only to simplify, but to make what they've got to do a little bit easier. And here's the other thing this does. When we're able to do this, it gives them intermediate points of success. What is the greatest motivator in mankind? It's success. It's success. It is. And the more we can help them experience success, the more they're going to help them stay on the right side, right circle. Right, Steve? Am I reading it right? The more we can do that, the more we're going to keep them on the right side rather than the left side. Right? And so that's what we're really all about. Okay? So, so he sets them down in groups of about 50. And then there's the principle of efficiency. Okay? Efficiency. This is an important thing. This is about doing more with less. Now, I don't know about your church, but we have been facing over the past 3, 4, 5 years maybe, the challenge of doing more with less when it comes to economic resources. Okay? It's just who we are. We're just kind of experiencing, we've experienced, a little bit of decline in our numbers. We've experienced some of the effects of a lot of our congregation now being mid to lower middle class in terms of their socioeconomic. We're continuing to see that trend with us. And we're trying to figure out how to make this work on a sustainable basis. The question is it sustainable? We don't know yet. We're trying to figure that out, right? But it is a reality of who we are. But Jesus says we've got to figure out how to achieve maximum output with minimal input. Okay? Efficiency is really the result of doing things the right way. Efficiency is not necessarily an action step. The action steps are the things you do to get to the point to where you can see greater output, right, through the usage of lesser input, right? And if you look at some of the statistics on the view of Christianity in our world today, we all better be looking at this because it may be a trend that the church as a whole, I already know it's a trend that the church as a whole needs to be dealing with, right? And we specifically need to figure out how it works in our churches as well, okay? So Jesus said here, he took the loaves, gave thanks to God, passed them out to the people. Afterward, he did the same with the fish. And they all ate until they were full. Now gather the leftovers, Jesus told his disciples, so that nothing is what? Wasted. How much waste do we have in our churches? How much waste do we have in our churches? One of the biggest things of waste that I see is unused real estate. Okay? You know what I'm saying? That's one of the things that I see. The other thing is I would consider money that is spent on experimental type things, or we say we're going to do this and we're going to take this initiative, we're going to invest these resources, we're going to invest this money, and you know what, we do it for a while, and for no good reason, Kelton, we stop doing it. We ever had that? Sustainable? We've all done some of that, right? Yeah, we've done that, right? Is that?
I think where you and I resonate so much is we both took something and we use it 24/7, 7 days a week.
Yeah, exactly.
My biggest problem when I first started church was, and I'd written something about when I was real young, and we have these massive places sitting.
Yes.
Real estate, they're not being used.
Absolutely.
And we decided we're going to put this place to use and turn it over as many times as possible.
Yep.
And our plan has been also, since we've got tenants, for them to eventually get to where they pay the whole thing.
Right.
And everything else goes in the ministry of mortgage, again, making maximum of minimal.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And we talked about this, you and I have.
You and I have a lot.
Yeah, and we've got a biker church over there. Now, they don't pay any rent. We'll probably have to change that in the next year. We got another church that used this one for about the last 8 months, right? And we've leased out 5,500 square feet in our very end bay down there, and they're fitting that, right? And that's going to be their permanent home. They're going to pay us lease. The benefit of that is that, you know what, we've got almost a brand new space, which has never been really functional for anything other than storage. And so now for us, we get a whole new building, basically, and they're going to pay us to use it after they pay to fit it. That's a good deal, right? That's a really good deal. And so that's kind of an example of what Ray's talking about. He's done the same thing, and he's got more commercial tenants. And Ray's had a lot of commercial tenants over the years who pay him, right, for their use of their shopping center, right? Their version of the shopping center. So So waste and redundancy is rife in the kingdom of God. But because, here's the problem, but because we don't see our churches as profit centers, we don't think about these things. We don't think about these things. You know what? When we talk about money, when you talk about money at your church, what's the first thing that the conversation usually goes to? Revenue or expenses? It does depend on who you're having a conversation with. But in most cases, when we're talking about the kingdom's resources, people are talking about expenses. We got to cut budget. We got to cut budget. Well, how about we talk about raising revenue? How about we talk about, and Jimmy's got a great story. Can I kind of tell you? Just give me a little time. Jimmy's church in Yadkinville. These guys have like a $250,000 budget. They got a big problem. They're going to exceed it by more than $100,000 this year, and they don't know what to do with the excess. Put your hand down, Davis. It's not your honorarium. I told Pat and I were talking at lunch and said, what are me and you doing up here, man? Jimmy needs to be leading this whole thing, you know, he's got this thing going on. And so, but now still, even with God blessing them that way, is it possible that there could be some waste in the operation of his church? Could be, yeah. But you know what? At least that shifts the conversation. Let's talk about raising revenue, right? Rather than keeping expenses down so much. You know, we're all staff members, right? Can I tell y'all, it's not expense reduction that's going to help you keep your job and stay in this livelihood. It's revenue generation. Because expense reduction is going to run out at some point. And I tell my staff, if you've got something you can do bivocationally, you better kind of lean into it. Because you know what? That's probably going to be something that's kind of necessary at some point, right? So anyway, just kind of think about that when it comes to terms of efficiency. What are you doing to really focus on revenue generation? That's kind of a different slant on things. It really is. So, and that has to do with generosity. And our conversation with Jimmy had to do with generosity. We were talking about generosity. And, you know, praise God that they have seen that at his church this year. What's an incredible issue. So anything on the working yourself out of a job things, I'm going to shift gears for a little bit. Kelton, let's get a mic for him, Christy. I know we didn't. I should have captured Ray on the mic. But yeah, give that to Kelton. I'm sure it's going to be valuable stuff.
I just had a question on the efficiency one. I'm just wondering, I was just looking at that with achieving maximum output with minimum input.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking that works well if you've got a kind of a smooth running system or things are on the right track.
Mm-hmm.
But so many of our churches are not on the right track, and so they need a major overhaul of some sort. And I'm just thinking about if that is the case, it seems like to me that at least in the short term, you may need to beef up your personnel or investment in pursuing some sort of initiation of a change, change an agent or a course change of some sort. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Depending on kind of where your organization is.
Yeah. And a lot of times
your church may be in need of some major overhauls.
Yes, which is
going to be expensive.
It's
It's going to be costly because you might have to bring in some outside speakers.
Absolutely.
Or hire a new leader or that sort of thing.
Sure.
And then once you get on your new footing, which is a more healthy footing, then you can start trimming the fat.
That's right.
Start really streamlining it.
That's right. And Kel brings a great point. Until you get to that place, you're going to have a difficult time cutting the expenses, right? And there will be some waste. And here's the thing. Sometimes when you got to do that overhaul he's talking about, you've got to invest resources that you don't have at the moment. You know what I'm saying? Because you probably don't have those resources that you need, right? We think a lot about capital campaigns for facilities. I don't know that I've ever heard a church undergo a culture campaign. We don't spend money on culture change, but we'll spend money on brick and mortar and capital stuff, right? What about a culture campaign? You know what I'm saying? So I think you're exactly right. I totally agree with you.
I'd like to speak to that as well.
I'm sure you would. Go ahead.
Obviously, I have no shortage of words to say. I mentioned earlier about the revisioning process that we work with, and that is as much as anything a culture shift.
That's a culture
for
campaign.
the churches.
That's a great point.
I just asked lots and lots of questions about status quo, how's it working for you, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then some guided conversations about, here's another way to look at that.
You are right, that is a culture campaign.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. Thank you, Bill. That's good. Anything else on the work yourself out of the job kind of thing? Okay, let me give you something about accountability, because I believe accountability is another term that we don't understand. In most organizations, accountability is assumed to be punitive. Even when we talk about accountability groups among pastors, we're looking for the bad stuff we're doing. When I get an accountability group, you're going to ask me if I look at any pornographic websites. You're going to ask me if I looked at a woman with any lust in my heart, right? Chances are the questions are not going to be about, what did you do that was really successful this week that you really need to replicate? You know what I'm saying? And so even in the church, I don't think we get accountability. We just don't. And so I want to give you some ideas about what accountability is and what it's not. And so on the second page, I've just given you, don't have to fill any blanks or anything here, I just gave them to you, okay? Because you may want to take this and make your own personal checklist. I would suggest that you come up and I'm going to tell you something we haven't done. I've tried to do it in the past, but I will tell you, I've kind of, we just, not for various reasons, I'm not going to tell you why, but we just didn't do it, right? We didn't get around to it. Didn't finish it. Because when you say, let's have a corporate definition, I'm talking about corporate, I'm not talking about company, I'm talking about corporate meaning collective, right, organizational. When you go to have a corporate definition of accountability, that will be threatening to your people. Because we, in general, we do not want to be held accountable. It is not in our default makeup to want to be held accountable. We are still Adam and Eve in the garden who disobeyed God initially, right? And here's the other thing about accountability. You can say as a leader that you're holding somebody accountable all day long, but if they're not agreeing to accept the accountability, there is no accountability relationship. There is none. A lot of times we fool ourselves as leaders and as pastors from a spiritual perspective, right? Because we assume we got this accountability thing going, but they don't want to be held accountable. You ever had a staff member who did not want to be held accountable? Oh, yeah, exactly. Like the collage of people kind of flashed through our mind over the years, right? Yeah, a lot of times it's because we don't do it right as leaders, okay? A lot of times it's our fault. It really is. So I want to kind of help you with some ideas that might help you shift your paradigm a little bit about this, okay? I did this with this was actually a government client, one of our state government agencies in the governor's cabinet, okay, that I was working with, and this is their agency definition of accountability that they came up with. I made a few tweaks to make it more churchy, okay, more relevant to take it out of government and into the faith-based world a little bit. But I want to share with you what we came up with to help them come up with a corporate definition of accountability. They phrased it in terms of, I foster a healthy accountability when I do these things, okay? For example, first thing, when I give you clear expectations, I am fostering or furthering good, healthy accountability, okay? That's one. You got to have clear expectations. If expectations aren't clear, you will not have accountability, all right? You will not have it. Second thing is, when I make you responsible for your actions, your inactions, notice your actions and your inactions, and outcomes, okay? When I help you be responsible for those things, right? If you as the leader are still the one ultimately responsible for what they do, you know what? And they're just kind of like, pal, here's what I did. Here's what I did. Take it on. It's what you da-da-da, right? Then you don't have accountability. I foster healthy accountability when I help you measure your success and failure. The question came up about measurement here. Steve didn't have an immediate answer, but Steve's answer was, I do know you got to measure it somehow, right? He said, figure out I think he kind of said what works in your context, right? You have got to find a way to measure that somehow, even if it's the number of gospel conversations. That may not be the best measurement, but a lot of times what we do is when we can't find the absolute best measurement, we don't measure at all. We don't take those intermediate measurements that can help us, right? I've seen churches do it all along, right? Well, you counting numbers, that's so shallow. All you care about is numbers, right? There's a book in the Bible called Numbers. And so I've seen a lot of churches throw the baby out with the bathwater because they refuse to measure, okay? You will not know, if you don't have a target, you'll hit it every time. And so that's what we do in the church a lot of times. We just kind of leave it that way, right? And so here's the next one. Foster healthy accountability when I help you identify causes for success and failure. This is where accountability, in just about all organizations in America, we have focused so much accountability on the failure side that we have failed to make it developmental. It's punitive in the vast majority of organizations when it should be developmental. For example, if you screwed something up, right? And you know what? We need to sit down and figure out why you screwed it up. Why is that? Because we don't want you to repeat the screw up. By the same token, if you did something really well, I should want to sit down with you and break down and analyze why you did it so well. Why? Why? Why would I want to do that? So you can repeat it. Exactly. That's developmental accountability. This works with paid staff, it works with volunteers. Matter of fact, sometimes it's more important with volunteers than it is with paid staff. Okay? Why would I say that? Because the paycheck in itself is a means of accountability. You serve at the pleasure of your church. I serve at the pleasure of Integrity Church. Ray serves at the pleasure of New Horizons. But Ray was the founder, bud. You're the founder. Don't they all serve at your pleasure? No, we serve at the pleasure of the church. Right, Ray? Now, our staff, we could kind of say, you serve at our pleasure.
Well,
So to speak, right?
let me know how that's working for you.
Yeah. And so what happens is, a lot of times, we fail to bring the developmental side of accountability. Here's another reason, pastors, I want to kind of give you an idea here. One of the things I say to my corporate clients a lot is, one of the things that you all do have that helps you motivate and hold your people accountable is that you are signing a paycheck. Pastor, you have a job that in some ways is harder than theirs because you were trying to motivate and hold people accountable without the benefit of a paycheck. You're not signing a paycheck. Does that make sense? So in that way, and I tell my corporate clients all this, you guys think you're great leaders. Well, there's some pastors who are a lot better than you. Because they're accomplishing big things without the benefit of a paycheck that they can give to people, but rather you, or that the pastors are doing things similarly, and they don't have that. They don't have that tool. Okay. All right. So here we go again. The next, help you take corrective actions, help you repeat actions that have led to success. Okay. I foster healthy accountability when I agree with you up front on a set of responsibilities, when I acknowledge results based on honest assessment. Circle that word honest, because many of us, we're pastors and we have a hard time with that word. You know why? You know why we're not honest sometimes? Because we don't want to tell people when they missed the mark. We don't want to hurt their feelings, and we don't want to tell them that what they did wasn't quite what we really needed. When in reality, that's the absolute best thing we can do for people. You don't have accountability if you're sugarcoating all your messages to your performers. And what happens a lot of times in churches, I've seen it time and again, people don't deal with the performance problems of staff members. And then when it gets so bad, after it's done, after it's just gotten to the point you can't do anything about it anymore, we got to do something, they hit them in the face with, I'm sorry, you're going to lose your job. And they never saw it coming. Because they never had the intermediate conversations that let them know that there was a problem. And until you have these conversations, you will not see improvement in people. You just won't. You've got to, again, it goes back to the problem definition. The 5 whys, the problem here, right? Can't fix it till you get the problem. Can't expect somebody to perform differently if you're not honest about their performance. Let me see. I give you healthy accountability when I act with the interest of the individual church in mind. when I regularly provide guidance, deadlines, results, etc., without micromanagement. This is kind of the hard place. This is kind of like that tightrope we got to walk sometimes as leaders. I don't walk it very well sometimes. What I told my staff is this, okay? If you don't want me to micromanage, and I certainly don't want to micromanage, I don't enjoy it, but I have this thing, there are a few things that I want to make sure that if I don't think they're being done, I'll jump in. And a lot of times they're being done, I just don't know it. So I've asked my staff to come up with a couple of tools just to demonstrate, just metrics. They're mainly measurements of things just so that I can know that it's working, so that I will not have the pressure to swoop in like a heron, and dive in and, get too deep, So think about what works for you, but for goodness sake, if you're a micromanager, you will never be able to have an accountability relationship with people. You just can't. If you're constantly in the micromanagement, it will not work. They will not feel empowerment. They will not feel that you have confidence in them to do the work. Okay. So I foster healthy accountability when I make myself available to you. When I help you align. Now this is important. When I help you align your work with our vision, mission, values, etc. You have got to have a handle on what the vision of your organization is. Okay? When you come up with a vision of your organization, not everybody's going to buy into it. Come up with a vision, that is when you will see who's committed and who's not. I'm not a proponent of letting everybody in on setting the vision. I never have been. Because not everybody is passionate about your church and what they're doing. Many people, if you let them in on setting your vision, you will have a vision that looks very much like who you are today. Because they don't want to move very far. Because to go where you need to go is going to take work. I foster healthy accountability when I give you the requisite authority to accomplish the responsibility. As I think we started out early, right? Responsibility and authority. And so here's when I make a mess of accountability, when I don't give clear expectations. When I am dishonest and not forthcoming about results. This is when I'm holding back instead of telling you that what you're doing is not really going to make it. It's going to miss the mark. I make a mess of accountability when I don't take responsibility for my share of the situation. Okay, remember what I said? We can talk about holding you accountable all day, but until I do it in a way that causes you to accept it, there is no accountability. Now, you're not going to get everybody to accept the accountability no matter what you do. Some people are inherently unreasonable. Oh, and that's what Kelton's going to talk about when he shares with us the 11 attributes that cannot be changed. Am I putting more words in your mouth, Kelton? You see what I'm saying? Some people, you're just not going to change them. They're not going to be reasonable. I make a mess of accountability when I delegate responsibility, but I retain authority. And when I use punishment as something other than a last resort, or when I seek first to blame. Does it kind of make sense? Okay. My suggestion is that you take this, and if there's something you can use, use it. But whatever you do, try to find a set of something that will help you have an accurate definition of what. Now these were not designed necessarily to handle the pastoral accountability groups. Understand. This is more of an organizational perspective. Okay? But I would encourage you to do whatever you can do to drive these things into the fabric of how you lead and how those around you can expect you to lead. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. Now, don't expect people to jump for joy and say, oh, we got a great new definition of accountability. Matter of fact, I continue to expect the opposite. There will be opposition. Yes, sir.
I'd like to give you an example of how this plays out.
Let's give this man a mic. This is good because I want to hear his example.
Okay. You heard me say earlier, I've been here in my place of service for 20 years.
Right.
One of the neat things that's been going on over the years is we've been able to work with our churches and help them move from a decline or plateau situation to a growing situation.
Yeah.
So, for example, this year, we've got ACP numbers in, 45% of our churches grew this year over last year.
Awesome.
Now, that's our highest percentage ever for a year. We've First time we hit 45%.
Right.
That meant that they grew, 45% of our churches grew by 2% or more in worship attendance this year over last year.
Fantastic.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right, now let me tell you a little bit about some of the pieces that went into that, year in and year out. Every year when the numbers come in, I write up a report for each of my pastors for his eyes only. In that report, I give him not only an annual report and on 5 different scales, I place his church in relation to all the sister churches in the association, so he can see exactly where they are in baptisms, in worship attendance, Sunday school attendance, missions, volunteers, and missions giving. 5 different areas. If they beat the average, they get a star, so they can be up to a 5-star church. If they beat the average in all 5 areas, and it goes down to 0, of course. And then I also give them a chart of the church over the last 50 years with all the numbers plotted on a graph, so they can see exactly the trend lines, not only for their tenure of ministry, but also for the last 50 years to see the trends for the church. So then I'll take that data, and I will do a pretty lengthy email highlighting all the wins that I can see in that story. Now, sometimes I have to look hard.
Yeah.
You know, it's 1 or 2 wins, but whatever are there, I try to really go after and say, give them attaboys. But I also don't sugarcoat. I say, you know, this year you didn't meet the average in any of the 5 categories.
Right.
But, you know, when we compare this year to last year, here's the 3 things that I see you have made some forward improvements in. Go, good job. Okay.
That's great.
Now, in the short term, it can be a little bit of an awkward email to read. But most times, they will write me back and say, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if it's just a polite thank you, but I have to assume that they're getting something out of it.
Probably because you have prepared that with this formula in mind.
I do.
Yeah.
I've been there a long time, so I try to work on relationships. But I'm figuring, okay, in the system, now, if not for me, who else in the system would ever give them honest feedback like this? None of the deacons would. They couldn't hear from any church member.
Right.
And unless they're brutally honest with some mentor out there that and divulge all of this information, I am the only person in the system that would ever even come close to knowing that much about them and caring, to really give them honest feedback. And so I try to do that on an annual basis. And little by little, it's changing the culture to, we are a growth culture. Churches in Johnson County grow because Johnson County is growing. And so we're changing the mindset from, what you said earlier. You said churches are in decline and we're going to do this and that and that. Well, that's not our mindset in Johnson County.
Right.
Our mindset is Johnson County is growing, and we're slated to be the fastest growing county in 2020, 2030, and that any church in this county is going to grow as well. So we're not planning for declining churches. We're anticipating growth.
Yeah.
And it's a slow process of changing that mindset about what is the future look like.
Yeah. No,
So we got data that
supports it. You got to have a measurement, right? One of the things that's important too. Now, I'm going to ask you what kind of person you are. Okay. There's 2 types of people in the world. Okay. So this is where we started. Okay. This is where we're going. Okay. We're going out here. This is where we're heading to. Okay. This is where we are today. Okay? See my point? Here's our goal out here. This is A, this is where we are today. This is B, this is where we're going. This is where we are today. Okay? How many of you are most likely, and I want you to be honest, because you're going to fall into one of two categories here. You're going to be either this person or this person. Is anybody going to take a guess at how I would describe these 2 people? Anybody want to take a guess? It's your perspective. It's your natural perspective. Are you going to be the person who is looking at where you are today and you're looking back from where you started and you appreciate and are motivated by that by the progress you've made? Or are you the person who is going to focus from here to your goal and see how far you've got to go? You see what I'm saying? This fosters appreciation and optimism. This, when left by itself, fosters pessimism. Because, oh my God, we got so far to go. We are not there. We should have already been there. And so we're dying. The ship's sinking. You know what I'm talking about? What kind of leader are you? Now, the positive leader, the best leader, you got to have a little bit of both. Okay? You got to be realistic about where you got to go, and you got to be realistic about the past. But a lot of church leaders, and a lot of, I just think a lot of people, I just see, and maybe I'm just wrong, but I just see a lot of people who tend to be out here, and a lot of times they'll say, well, how far had you come? And so then when they give me an honest answer, it's like, well, dadgum, y'all done pretty dang good in the past 2 years. Look where you came from, right? Jimmy wasn't a $100,000 surplus 5 years ago, right, Jimmy? You didn't have that then into year 10 of his ministry at that point, right? But, this is a big part of how you lead, and this is really important. Being honest about the past, but also honest about the future. But be optimistic, right? Your pessimism is not going to motivate people. It's just not, right? But then again, your unrealistic optimism is not going to either. Does that make sense? There has to be a balance with that, okay? So kind of keep that in mind. And measurements can really help you with this, right? He's in a growing county, okay? Many of us are not. So your definition of growth church, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Kelton, may be different in your context than it is for Kelton. But the principles are still the same, right? The principles are important. They're still consistent, okay? So let me shift to the final thing before we go, okay? I've shared this, I don't know, I might have shared this in Carrie, I'm not really sure. But I think there are 5 or 6 things that I think that this practical side of discipleship and working yourself out of a job is all about a thing called delegation, okay? And delegation is important because I don't think we church leaders necessarily on the whole do a good job at it. Now some of us, we don't delegate, we just don't, okay? We just don't. Go do that, we don't really care how it happens or what the quality of it is. Just try to get it, just as long as I think it's getting done, I don't really care about it. That's all I really care about, right? But keep in mind, all 3 of these pieces of paper go together. If you will not delegate well, and the delegation process in your church will not work very well if you don't have at least some progress toward a journey to healthy accountability, okay? Because these things have to be present in order for your delegation to work, okay? Delegating by that, I just mean I'm taking stuff that I do and I'm going to give it to somebody else, right? I'm going to give it to help them develop. To help in the interest of what? Helping them develop and also working myself out of a job. That make sense? You got that? You can't do working yourself out of a job without delegation. That's why Jesus said put them in groups of 50. I'm letting you guys go do it. You feed them. Don't expect me to do a miracle all the time. Although them feeding them was a miracle anyway. But that was kind of, he was trying to drive their expectations. He was managing their expectations, right? So I believe that there are about 5 or 6 reasons that we don't delegate well. And this is across the board. This is in church. This is in for-profit organizations. I use this with my clients, and it's pretty much all the same. And there's these 6 reasons. I want to encourage you to be a little introspective because I presented this in a church setting not long ago. And one of the persons actually felt like none of these things fit them. And I happened to know them, and I was like laughing so hard inside because I'm thinking you're looking like an idiot in front of your peers because they just know how ridiculous you're sounding right now. Okay, and so there are 6 reasons that leaders may not delegate very well. And by the way, if you don't delegate very well, you're probably not a leader anyway. You're a manager, okay? There's a difference between management and leadership. We got a lot of manager pastors. That's different from a leader pastor, okay? So why don't we, here's the first thing. A lot of times we don't delegate very well because of a desire to maintain control, okay? A desire to maintain control. Here's the deal. I have to do this myself. Sometimes it's to justify the job that we have. Sometimes it's because of an insecurity that just says, I gotta have my hand in it. Okay? Sometimes you're just a really responsible person. So there's a positive side to this, right? You're just really responsible, and you just want to make sure, you know, that you, kind of like me with some of those key things where I tell my staff, okay, I don't want to swoop in for you, but I probably will if you don't give me a reason not to, right? And that's control. I have that, absolutely. And so the reality is, no, you really don't have to do this yourself usually. You may be taking up the time your team needs for you to lead by doing the work others should be doing. We as humans generally like to be in control. We probably have insecurities that drive in us the need to control. The appeal is that we have control. The appeal is that having control, having control makes us feel more significance of ourselves, right? So it may very well be control. Is that something that might keep you from delegating to people to develop them? Here's the second one, perfectionism. Perfectionism, okay? This one basically says this: no one can do this as well as I can, so I need to do it. Okay? The first part of that statement is okay. It may very well be true that nobody can do it as well as you can. It's the second part that gets us in trouble. That we justify because of that, we have to be the ones to do it. The reality is that may be true, but it's important to balance what's good enough with the fact that your team needs you to have the time and capacity to provide leadership. In addition, the stuff you do yourself is stuff that someone else could be learning on. Okay? So perfectionism, here's the deal. You got something, you got a program, you got something to say 92% where you want it to be. And you know what? You're going to work, and you're going to work, but you know what? You're going to strive extra hard to get it to 97%. Okay? I've got some of this, I won't tell you where in the church we got it, but we got some of this. 92% is good enough. You want to get it to 97%, and it's going to take 25% of the effort that it took you to get to 92% to get to 97. Does that make sense? Usually it does not. But math usually doesn't work that well in the mind of the perfectionist a lot of times. Because their goal is what? Perfection. It's got to be perfect, right? It's got to be perfect. Here's the third, compassion. And I bet some of us, we probably know this one. You know what, our people already have so much to do. Their lives are so chaotic. They have so much that they got to do. How can I give them any more? Oh, I hear this in the church so often. Oh, we can't ask our people, we can't schedule that. Their lives are already so da-da-da-da-da. How can we ask them to do anything else? Does it make sense? Sometimes sometimes it's very true that they have too much to do. Okay? But here's also something that may be very true. They themselves are probably not doing a very good job of delegating. And sometimes you have to force things down in order to it's kind of like the WD-40, you squirt on something, right? You want to loosen. Something needs to be loosened up in the organization structure somewhere, because a lot of times we don't, and I say it's a lot in the corporate world where organization structures tend to be more hierarchical. One place in the organization can clog everything else back up if we're not delegating right. If Steve Davis is doing stuff that Barry Jones or Vince or Tyler could be doing, and he just won't let go of it, but he's saying, hey, these guys got so much to do, chances, Barry may not be delegating his stuff to the people he has at his disposal, right? So what's Steve going to do? Continue to, impose that on himself? Heck no. Somebody needs to help Barry start doing this, right? And Barry, you're kind of a perfectionist, aren't you?
Yes.
You've had to deal with that over your time as an XP, haven't you? Yeah. And that's not easy. The perfection piece is not easy, right? And neither is the compassion thing, because both perfection and compassion, we kind of see those things as virtues, don't we? They're virtues. These are all products of a virtue that oftentimes has kind of gone a little bit, to excess. And so the fourth thing is what I call concentrated or skewed competencies. All right, this occurs when there is strong competency with subordinates or people in your church, but that competency is concentrated in a narrow range of subordinates. So, for example, let's go back to Steve again, because he's got some old Ray's here. Let's say Ray has a project that's really important that he needs to get done. And he knows, he has confidence in Sam, that if he gives this thing to Sam, it is going to be done absolutely correctly, and he's going to have everything covered, and it's going to be a great project. Right, Sam? He knows that he can do that, right? Now, he does that once. Sam does a bang-up job. Next one comes along. Sam does a bang-up job. Third one comes along. It's not quite as big a deal. The impact on this one's not quite as good, but what does Ray do anyway? Who does he give it to? He gives it back to Sam again. Okay? But guess what? Morgan is pretty new to the staff. That probably would have been a project that would really be good for Morgan to kind of cut her teeth on. Fair, Morgan? Right. So who's he doing a disservice to? Morgan and Sam. Right? And the organization. Right? Because when he gives it to Sam again, right, when Morgan could have been doing it, he makes that non-value added work. We in the church talk about efficiency. Okay? The biggest enemy, I think, of efficiency in the church is non-value added work. What is non-value added work? It's work that is done at a cost to the organization or the church that is greater than what it really should have been. For example, if you're a staff person doing something a volunteer should do, you're doing non-value added work. That's inefficiency. That's inefficiency. And a lot of times, we as staff go in and do those things because we know how to do them and we can do them and it makes us feel good because we do them successfully. We're looking, and it's a validation thing a lot of times, right? So anyway, I don't feel bad. This stuff happens in the corporate world. We're no different. They're no different than we are in this setting. I can tell you that. Same problem, probably worse for a number of reasons. So the reality is while it's nice to have that person you can really rely on, there are some potentially negative implications. The first is obviously possibility of burnout. Sam's burnt out. I mean, look at the guy. I mean, he's aged 5 years in the past 2 weeks, you know. I mean, just look at Sam. He looks, you know, what are you doing to him, Ray? Come on, man. So, the second one is a perception of favoritism or partiality toward that person. It's not going to do Ray any favors if the rest of the staff think that he plays favorites with Sam. Here's another one. Frustrating others who could be confidently doing that work, i.e. Morgan. We may also drive away those best employees because of an excessive workload. So at some point, Sam can't handle it anymore. Yeah? What's that? My staff's giving me indications of where I'm doing this. And that's probably true. Here's the fifth thing is competency deficit. And this really is kind of true in churches. See, the good side of working in the corporate world is they sign paychecks. And there probably are systems that they have, and not in all cases, believe it or not. It's very few that do this well in the corporate world. They do have systems for getting people out of jobs they shouldn't be in or getting them out of the company. We really don't do that well in church. Okay? So sometimes we have to deal with flat out not having the competency available to us to delegate to. Does that make sense? In the church setting, we have to ask the question, if we don't have that competency, should we be doing that function? Does that make sense? This has become more and more real to us as our demographic has changed over the years. There probably used to be a lot of people in our church who had jobs out in the world, in the corporate world, where they had strong leadership type stuff going on. We don't have as many of those people today. Because for us in Burlington, this is not a place where industry is really settled. Matter of fact, industry has fled over the past 30, 40, 50 years, right? Gary, you're with me, right? We've lived here all of our lives. Steve, we've seen it, right? We've watched it all of our lives. And so what happens with this is that we've become more of a transient place. So it's come to the point now where we have somebody in our church now who I know has a really good job somewhere. I mean, I'm kind of going to the Steve model here, Steve. I'm thinking, okay, we got him for a little while. We're not going to have him forever. We're not gonna have them forever. They're probably gonna move on because they moved here to further their career. It's doubtful that Burlington, now they may go to Greensboro, Raleigh, Durham, whatever the case might be, right, where there are opportunities, right? But largely, if they're here, chances are they're gonna be going on somewhere else, right? So that's another thing you gotta, kind of context and all that good stuff. Finally, friendship, pre-existing relationships may get in the way. This is really more prevalent in the church than it is in the corporate world. It really is. Because we have relationships as pastors that probably our CEO counterparts in industry may not necessarily have, right? Like again, there's the paycheck versus the relational kind of thing, if that makes sense. So anyway, this is where the perception of favoritism can also come into play as well. So anyway, my point is today, just to kind of drive all this home, is that working yourself out of a job is a big part of discipleship. The stuff that my partners, talked about already today, said so much to this. And here's the thing, we've got to get this part right too. Because we can, all this stuff, a big part of this is of obedience. Right, Steve? It is how we help them be obedient by showing them what to do, right? And this is not the end all, and it's not necessarily the way that might tell you how to directly interface with them, but it gives us some more maybe some more thoughts about how we as leaders need to position ourselves and how we need to think and how we need to lead, okay, in order to really make this happen. Because we can talk about this great stuff all day, which is totally biblical, and it really defines the problem for us really well. It really does. And I kind of had an idea that Steve was going to go through some of this stuff, at least I've seen it, some of it before, it was just fabulous. And while I don't have all the answers for how we take that and take the next step, I do know that there are things that we have to be and do ourselves as leaders for that to have a shot at being successful. Okay, does that kind of make sense? We have to position ourselves, and the way we lead is a big part of that for our people, if we want them to become true disciples. Okay, kind of make sense? Clear as mud. Any thoughts, comments? Kelton, I said that. You keep the mic.